I'm going to introduce my panel. Haig Bukchakian from Brixmore Property Group, Joe DeGiorgio from Urban Edge Properties, Seth Galzaler is our fearless leader at ICSC Eastern Division as the VP, Jason Goodell with Party City, and Eric Vandervalk, former president of Christmas Tree Shops. Everybody, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Morning.
Morning.
So let's jump right into things. Safety and innovation in today's retail environment at open-air shopping centers. A lot has happened in the year plus now that we have been living with the COVID virus. I don't think any of us anticipated that this was going to be coming, and therefore we all had to adjust on the fly. Eric, from a retailer's perspective, tell us about the early days. What was it that you focused on for your team, your employees, and your consumer? And how did you guys immediately adjust? What were those things that you guys focused on relative to safety in order to still operate your business?
Sure. I would say the first focus was interpreting all of the science and information out there from the federal, state, and local governments. And it was the largest challenge. It continues to be the largest challenge of managing through the pandemic because there's so many inconsistencies in the different government groups and experts in the field. So trying to interpret what is most important and develop the game plan, I think, was challenge number one. Then procuring PPE, as we learned early in the pandemic, the cleaning supplies and hand sanitizers and potentially gloves and masks were all going to be important in keeping associates and customers and the public safe. So huge priority to procure the PPE. Next was enabling social distancing and managing the density in the store, the customer count and keeping it below certain levels, and changing merchandise standards and reinventing the front end of our store so that we could manage lines and traffic and really enable that social distancing, in the use of parking fields and outdoor spaces to do the same, to try to still display the merchandise and maximize the potential of the business while enabling customers to feel safe in that environment. And I think those are probably sum up, Daniel, the early challenges. It moved into what does contact tracing look like as the next big challenge, in how do you manage contact tracing? How do you protect the privacy of associates? And there's so much emotion around that subject. So that's probably the next challenge.
Got it. Eric, thanks. Joe, from a landlord's perspective, the same thing. We're all faced with this unforeseen, unexpected virus. Your portfolio in particular is here in the Northeast, where it was hit hardest in the very early parts of it. What were the things that you guys focused on for your team? What were the things that you did at your properties? And how did you interact, communicate, and collaborate with your retailers in the very beginning of the pandemic?
So, Daniel, in the beginning, it was very, very tough. There was a lot of uncertainty about, was it safe to go out? Was it, what were the different things that we could do to partner with our retailers in order to get them reopened after this thing subsided? And there was so much uncertainty. So what we did was we really partnered and stayed in constant communication with our tenants and our customers, and also our local communities. We partnered with a lot of them to do research and make sure that we're, taking the necessary steps in order to, reopen our centers when it was appropriate.
Got it. Hi. Let's move into some of the examples of what you've experienced from the beginning to where we are today, because not everything that you've tried or retailers have tried has necessarily worked out, and or to Eric's point, it's been an evolution in terms of what we know about the virus and what CDC and other guidelines are. So, tell us in that you guys have a national portfolio. You have different geographies, weathers, all of those impacts from a timing when certain parts of the country were more impacted than others. Help us see and understand what were some of the good examples and bad examples. And then, if you could, tell us about what impact from an operational perspective today you're still dealing with in terms of managing properties that are having to deal with the impacts of lockdowns and limitations.
Yeah, lots of stuff in that question there, Daniel. So let me see if I can break it down.
One question, 27 parts.
Yeah. As Eric said, we're dealing with jurisdictional differences, right, from one end of the country to the other. And in the early days of the pandemic, in March of last year, it was a struggle just to understand what the impact was in each location. There was no universal solution to all of this. It was having to figure out on a case-by-case basis what we were going to do in many instances. And so it was first and foremost struggling to get the information that actually could help us make better decisions. And then, as Eric alluded to, one of sort of the early things that I think the retailers understood was they're going to need to come outside, right? So it's no longer, can you stay within the four walls of your leased premises? What can we do outside the space to actually continue to operate in a safe manner? And so we tried to be as accommodating as we could to particularly our small shop, more local mom and pop tenants, because we understood that they were going to need that assistance most. For us, our shopping centers never closed. The vast majority of our shopping centers across the portfolio have some combination of essential retailers within them. So we never closed. We were never able to sort of shut down, take a step back, and really think about how to reopen the centers. They never closed. So for us, it was about adjusting service levels on the fly, adjusting expense levels to try to ease the burden on our tenants on the fly, figuring out what is the right setup in the common area of the shopping center that allows for a bunch of tenants side by side who have different needs and demands to be able to operate. One tenant may want to actually set up tables and chairs and service their customers in the exterior. Another tenant right next door might have a 400-foot long queuing line for people who are waiting to get in the store to get some product that they need. So
let me interrupt you right there real quick, because this is a question. So what did you do? Larger tenants have REAs or exclusives or restricted areas. There's all these convoluted limitations, restrictions that may exist at any property. Was it the Wild Wild West? How did you go about, refereeing and identifying what was going to happen at any given property, given these moving parts?
Yeah, I mean, look, in unprecedented set of circumstances like we were encountering and dealing with, requires an unprecedented approach. And frankly, you used the right term. In some sense, it was a bit of the Wild West, and we were sort of allowing tenants to do what they wanted in certain respects. But we also very early on took a step back and made a decision. Number one, we weren't going to charge anybody for using common area space to continue to operate. So we did allow tenants to do what they needed to do without any cost to them, other than having to sign a license agreement with us. So no fee license agreement, which established some ground rules for the arrangement, whereby the tenant is going to agree to work within the confines of safety and protocol. And we in turn are going to allow them to do this for some period of time. Obviously, we put some termination rights in there. And again, the intent was never to charge them or to make this a monetary event for us. More so, it was an opportunity to make sure that our tenants can survive and keep operating, which many of them have. Now, of course, there were some subsequent conversations about rent deferrals and so on, and whether or not we allowed a tenant to use common space became a factor in those discussions, as you can imagine it would be. But for the most part, it's worked pretty well. We've had to ask tenants to adjust their setups. In fact, I don't know if Emily, if you want to throw some of the photos up on the chat there, and I can talk through what a few of those look like. But there were some things that some of the tenants did initially that weren't working out so well. So we asked them to adjust, and the fact that we weren't charging them anything made it a little easier to ask them to adjust when we needed them to. So there's a couple photos in here. The first couple examples for anyone who's looking at it, you click on the photo, it'll get bigger in your screen, and then you can click away from it to make it go away. So a couple photos here just showing some. The big concern here, especially in this first photograph, is just public safety, right? You got cars whizzing down the street. This doesn't actually was not at a Brixmor center, just to be clear about that. But cars whizzing down the street with nothing but a flimsy barricade separating people sitting and dining from the vehicular traffic. This wasn't a Brixmor center, but we had examples of this in our centers, and certainly we addressed them. The next one is another example where you see just a very flimsy separation outside a retail space with some plastic chairs. Again, not really indicative of what we're trying to convey or what really we think is the safest, best way to operate under the circumstances, especially when, as you mentioned, Daniel, you got people, different retailers asking to do these things side by side. So there was another couple photo examples of one tenant who actually set up an outdoor space and then enhanced it with some additional barricading. And that was in discussion with the property management team, making sure that we figured out the best way to help them set themselves up for success.
Great.
I'm not sure I got to all the parts of the question.
Don't worry. We're going to spread it around, but we're coming back to you for sure. Jason, from a retailer's perspective, as you moved into it, and some of the things that Haig was mentioning in terms of what you guys did in order to, where have you gotten to from a safety perspective for your team in order to still operate as efficiently as possible? And what challenges did you run into potentially in terms of things that you tried and or have implemented that may or may not have been successful? And any issues or any stories with landlords in terms of where you saw a positive collaboration in terms of things being addressed in order for both parties to operate?
Sure. Thanks, Daniel. Going back to what Eric said, we really started out and dealing with the same things he discussed earlier. And then from there, it really started to focus on buy online, pick up at curbside, and also in-store. So in-store, we were prepared for right out of the gate, but curbside became the next thing that we really had to address. We worked very closely with our landlords and really did have a cooperative going across the board to establish not only parking spots in the field that worked for not only us but with other tenants as well. And then we actually worked with pods because our big holiday is Halloween. So even before the holidays hit, we had our big holiday. So no one was really prepared at that point. People hadn't done this before. So we really worked very closely with our landlords to establish open communication, figuring out where we could put our spots for curbside pickup. We started working on delivery as well. So it really started to open up, I would say, over the summer as everything progressed forward. And our business really third quarter was very strong due to cooperation across the board from the landlords.
If I asked you to name, were there any landlords or tenants that you had some bad experiences with? Just kidding. They're
Not really.
Landlords are no bad retailers.
I wouldn't say, but everyone was very open to this working together because it was new for everyone.
Right.
At least nobody on the call, right?
Right. Definitely not Urban Edge or Brixmor, right, for sure.
Definitely not. But I would like to, Jason, I'd like to add to that. In May, shortly after the pandemic started, we were faced with the new challenge of helping you guys and other tenants reopen, and especially the restaurants. Shutting them down for over a month was really challenging. Getting them reopened was a monumental task. So I worked with my property management and marketing team to come up with a strategy to give retailers a safe and convenient way to transact. So I want you to pull up the first photo. I think it's Urban Edge Grab and Go. And And what we did here, was we developed a plan to install grab-and-go customer spaces for tenants that weren't able to offer curbside or touch-free pickup areas. So the grab-and-go spaces offered flexibility and provided options to customers if they needed short-term parking to run quickly into a store or pick up or drop off a return. So I think this was a good example, working closely with our retailers to make sure that they had every option available to them and making it safe and convenient. So I think that was really good. And further, the next slide was, if you can pull that up, we worked with some of our retailers to do their own grab and go, or in this case, it was Kohl's. So Kohl's, they wanted dedicated parking for their customers where they could have their associates bring the merchandise out to the cars and put it into their trunk. So it was really a great amenity. It's something that's going to remain beyond the pandemic, but it's just a new way of that we're going to have to do business. And like Hike said, whatever we could do to help our retailers, we're going to do, and within reason. But it's things like this that really really helps, and it's going to be an ongoing thing that we're going to continue with them.
Yeah, no question. I want to definitely focus on trends that everyone predicts or believes are going to be with us in some form or fashion. Eric, and then Hike, let's talk about the impact from an expense standpoint. Clearly, both in the immediacy of the impact and subsequently to today, there's different expenses that you're incurring, either as a one-time or as an ongoing, that weren't in the line item in the budget before. What does that mean from a operational profitability perspective on the retailer side, as well as on the landlord side, on the expense side? And then Hike, if you could, how is the landlord treating these expenses relative to a landlord cost versus something that's beneficial to the property and the tenants as a common area pass through? Eric, what from a retailer, how have you thought about and how have you guys looked at the additional expense in order to operate safely for you and your consumers and your employees?
Sure, good question. I'll speak on behalf of the operating business units of Bed Bath & Beyond, which is where I manage the safety program and was the architect of the reopening strategy. And so it's a little bit more of a global perspective versus Christmas tree shops that isn't as sophisticated in multiple channels. I think, initially it's the cost of PPE and absorbing what is, fairly significant incremental cost of the business. There's also then, in a physical retail environment, the enabling of social distancing means taking merchandise product off the floor. So we've certainly seen the trend across the industry of consolidated shopping trips, and potentially presenting less product means a potentially lower average transaction than what is its ultimate potential, which is why the pressure potentially to move into parking lots with tents or on the sidewalks, right? The multiple channels is probably where I would focus, more attention though. The BOPUS channel, the ship from store channel, curbside service, the white glove service, the final mile delivery potentially from what was a retail storefront versus a warehouse fulfillment center. And what all that means today and what that may mean in a year or two when the pandemic subsides and we come out of this. Today it's survival, and it's creating these channels of business that make the customer feel most safe in transacting with us. But the truth of the matter is these channels potentially are less profitable to many retailers, and we have to grapple, with that. What is the mix of business today that means survival and means continuing to drive the top line potentially at additional expense versus tomorrow, and where does the customer settle in terms of the channel mix in the future? Have they all gravitated now more fully towards e-commerce, and retailers are then faced with the challenge, how long term will I fill e-commerce orders using a physical store, using a fulfillment center hub, direct from vendor potentially is part of the mix. And what does that mean? So the economics of those channels, I think, is what's challenging us now, what will challenge us in the future. And it really turns what was a physical store shopping experience in that facility into a warehouse in part, and it's unit fulfillment to ship to customers. And the economic model of I'm presenting a retail experience to a customer who wants to come in and enjoy that physical retail experience versus using that store to fulfill orders is challenged. I think I'd add just one more quick comment that I think what's been going on in retail, a massive trend over the last few years to make these experiences more relevant and more entertaining, has to significantly accelerate now, because we need to provide an even more compelling physical store experience to convince a customer to come in the store. And that's probably going to remain with us indefinitely.
Hey, Daniel, let me just jump in for a second, because Eric and I, in my prior life, Eric and I worked together for the first few months through the pandemic when I was at Bed Bath & Beyond. And, you raised a very interesting point about cost and expense. And I remember very clearly the first positive case that we had reported of COVID. It was actually in a distribution center, and we had to shut it down. And the interesting point was we had a cleaning crew come in, and the next day we had less than 30% of our associates show up because they were afraid. We spent about $1,200 to get it cleaned. The next day we ended up with a white suit cleaner that had to come in. A group of guys, it was like $13,000 to have them come in, but we had pictures, we sent them to people. So all of those expenses, there was a little bit of theater involved, but at the same time, it was important. And I think that Stephanie talked about being demonstrative and conspicuous in the way that we're doing cleaning now. That's an ongoing expense that I think Haig and Jason and Joseph and Eric are all going to be able to say is never going to go away. So that to me is a huge number that we're going to start seeing.
So Haig, let's talk about it from a landlord's perspective. In all aspects for your own team, as well as your retailers and the consumers, you're spending more money, and in different shapes and sizes from when things started and to where we are now, where we are from a geographic standpoint relative to who can or can't use outdoor space because of weather. But what does that look like? How are you treating it in the short run, and what's been the impact?
Yeah, so obviously for us, it's slightly different, right? We're an open air shopping center owner developer, so for us there isn't a lot of interior common space. So the cleaning protocols and the requirements for cleaning are different. We're not necessarily dealing with the same considerations you're going to deal with on the inside of the space. Nevertheless, what we realized early on was, and I alluded to this a minute ago, we're going in a triple net lease environment. We're passing through a lot of these expenses to tenants who may not actually be open and operating and actually generating revenue. So for us, the priority was about actually reducing our expense loads as much as possible during this period of time, because we didn't know how long it was going to last, and we didn't know exactly what the impact was going to be on these retailers. So we had to take a hard look at what we were actually doing at the centers and figure out what can we cut out from an expense standpoint without sacrificing the operations and the standards we're maintaining at the center. So they still had to be clean, they had to be well lit, they had to be properly secured, but there were things we could take away for a temporary stretch, like mulching or painting and things of that nature. And by doing that, bring down our expense loads to some degree and ease the burden on certainly the mom and pop, the small shop tenants, the mom and pop tenants who otherwise would be looking at, on top of a rent bill, a big CAM bill for a period of time that they weren't operating. So we were pretty focused on that. And then what we realized was, as tenants were able to reopen and get back to business, there was a sort of a gradual increase and a ramping back up of those expenses to more normal levels. So yes, we have incurred some added expenses and expect a higher level in certain categories, but on the whole, we made sure that we were able to scale back enough to offset any additional costs that gets passed through to the tenant.
So Haig, we have a question since you had mentioned it. How long were the license agreements that you were doing with terminations? Were they 6 months, a year, 2? What was the terms that you put in there relative to those to the license agreements?
Yeah, they varied. Typically, we were doing a 3-month agreement in the beginning, with obviously the ability to terminate it at any time. And I think what we've done is we've just sort of allowed them to go month to month since then. A lot of the tenants actually have just pulled back on what they were doing because they don't need it anymore. And then in other cases, and certainly in the warmer weather climates, they're still doing it. And in some cases, those temporary arrangements have become permanent and been negotiated into renewal or into a new lease of some sort.
Got it. So let's talk about, now that we've had, a year almost of exposure and evolution in terms of adjusting to living with the virus and where we are hopefully today, where there's light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccinations and the vaccines. Let's talk about the things that you guys may have already fundamentally decided for your businesses are here to stay in some form or fashion to what they look like today. They may evolve some more, but you've decided that they're good for business, both for you and your core business, your customers, your employees. What are some of those trends that you would say at this point have long-term viability for your business? Jason, let's start with you. What does that look like for Party City, and what could we look to expect to see from a going forward basis?
Well, I think we're changing the whole experience right now. The in-store experience for us right now, we're in the process of remodeling close to 100 stores that are going to make it just more customer focused and friendly to shop, along with curbside is definitely here to stay. We're even jumping into balloon delivery. Balloon sales have been very strong through this period. People couldn't go out and celebrate in their, in restaurants and things, so they did it at their house. So balloons being a focus and then being able to deliver that to our customers same day has become a real central focal point for us right now, for sure.
Great. Joe, what do you see from your perspective in terms of operating your portfolio? What changes from an operational perspective and/or engagement with your retailers do you anticipate the trend continuing in some form or fashion?
So as I mentioned before, definitely the grab and go and the curbside pickup initiative is definitely going to be an ongoing thing that we need to work with our retailers on and our restaurants in order for them to be successful. It's something that, even prior to the pandemic was kind of coming up with some of the retailers like Target and Walmart. They were requesting these pickup areas to make it more convenient for their internet shoppers so that they could just buy online and then pick up at the curbside. So I think that's going to continue, but also, as Heike said earlier, we cut expenses significantly in our strip centers, at our strip centers. And, we have a handful of enclosed malls, and the expenses there have actually gone up as a result of cleaning efforts, providing hand sanitizer, providing all different PPE for our customers and our employees. So, I think that's going to continue for the short term, but we're just going to have to see what time is going to, bring us. But hopefully with the vaccines, being distributed, we'll be in a better spot in a few months.
Eric, what do you see in your experience in terms of what would you anticipate to be future trends for retail, maybe not only in addition to your experiences with the Bed Bath & Beyond and Christmas tree shops, but what do you see coming out of this as being longer term trends that will have sticking power and that we need to be aware of?
I think, it's probably more an acceleration in ensuring that retail experience is highly relevant and compelling, and thinking creatively about potentially mixed use and store within a store model and services potentially that you could offer in a retail environment that just make that trip more worthwhile and make the dwell time in a store, is maximum is entertaining as possible. That I think for retailers, we're looking at this is a good marriage between product and other entertainment, potentially, maybe in the same way that mall developers and owners are looking at that experience. Inside of a 30,000 square foot store, we've got to think about, is that dedicated 100% to product? What percentage of that space is dedicated to fulfillment and warehouse capacity? What percentage is dedicated to potentially food service type environment? And what would complement that retail experience? I won't dwell on the channel shift. I know I spoke to it before, but curbside and BOPUS, they're here to stay, and we've got to own that as an industry and ensure we're continuing to enable the customer to transact with us in that way as well. With the customers willing to pay for that convenience in the future, probably nothing, but that's a question that's on my mind. In order to maintain a certain level of profitability, so we'll see where that goes.
Seth, you're a recovering retailer, but you're still in your recovery period. What do you've been living through this both personally and professionally, but what do you think are some of the trends from an operational perspective in operating the business, from a real estate perspective? What do you think emerges from a retailer's perspective as future trends that are here to stay?
So I was thinking a lot when Stephanie was speaking, and she talked about what the study showing a demand or what did she call them? The face shields at the registers, and whether associates are going to be wearing masks. Is it a problem for them to wear masks? Are you going to have mandatory mask requirements? All those things are issues that I don't know where they're going to go. I know in Tom's talk, he talks about Asia post SARS and how it was years and everybody was wearing masks regularly. And I think that's all of those type of things. And I know that somebody asked a question about what else is going to be done for safety in the Q&A section. And I think that's part of the determination is coming up with long-term operating systems that can work. That's really where I'm thinking there's tremendous opportunity. And then on the operational side, functional side, we talked about BOPUS and figuring out how to do that, and Eric will tell you, and I'm sure Jason already did so, talk about how innovative people had to be. I mean, I'm sure that the balloon delivery was done by just some aggressive store manager who thought of it first and said, okay, I got to make this work. And now it's probably their process in the chain. And I know Eric brought a tremendous amount of product online in a very short time to be able to have customers curbside pickup. That was the inventory wasn't necessarily available weeks before. So I think there's a lot of innovation that's going to be coming around. Delivery is here to stay. Last mile is critical. Seeing it, as Eric talked about, from the store, and also conversion of dark stores. I saw something not too long ago. One of the supermarkets is taking a dark store and making it total delivery, just making it delivery. So I think you're going to see a change in those areas as well.
Hi, from your experiences and what your team is telling you and the feedback and your interaction with retailers and operations, what do you see as trends for you at Brixmor in terms of managing and operating your open air properties?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, Seth and Eric are hitting the point, and you as well, Daniel. There's a trend towards a retail environment here that starts to look a little less like retail, right? It becomes more fulfillment, more actual warehousing type use of space, not only in the retailer sector, but also in the food sector. You're seeing ghost kitchens and things like this that are now actually vying for space in shopping centers because it is close to the customer, and it's an opportunity for them to be able to do what they're doing more in a better way. So but what does that mean for the shopping center, right? That obviously poses challenges for us, because at the end of the day, for the shopping center on the whole, those types of uses don't really add anything. They don't help the shopping center. They don't bring in customers who hang around and maybe cross shop with other tenants in the shopping center. So for us, it is really about figuring out how to increase dwell time and how to be relevant to the particular community that we're serving. What is the needs of that community? What do they want there? What do they want to come in for? And what's going to keep them there? And so, we really are looking towards this movement over the last 12 months towards the exterior of the shopping center and the outdoor spaces. and what we can be doing to make those permanent and inviting, and to make them more four-season, because obviously it has to be four-season. If you're outside the space, you have to figure out how to do that in an inviting way. So, we're looking at nighttime activation, creative use of lighting, of obviously landscaping, hardscaping, and figuring out how to make sure that we're creating inviting spaces that fit the needs of that particular community. And it is different community by community.
So let's talk about it, because there's been a lot of mention in different scenarios about it, which is the utilization of outdoor space, whether that's sidewalk, parking lot, some other type of adjacent area. And it's happening pervasively for many different retailers within a shopping center. And they're generating business that they otherwise can't generate because of the restrictions, lockdowns, or other guidelines that they have to adhere to. But they're, and it's giving them an opportunity to operate, maybe not as they were in a traditional way, but they're operating and generating revenue. From a landlord's perspective, and then obviously we'll hear the counter argument from the retailers. Hai, you mentioned you weren't charging rent or fee in the beginning, and you just mentioned that you need to consider that from a longer term trend aspect. Where do you think, maybe not an official policy, but where do you think that evolves to as it relates to a retailer more permanently using that outdoor space in some form or fashion to conduct its business?
Yeah, I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. We have already seen in some cases that when it comes time for a renewal discussion, we're talking about this change of how that retailer has operated over the last few months and what their expectations are going forward. And as I said, in some cases, retailers have done it because they needed to during a shutdown, and then they realize it's not really the way they want to operate or what's best for their operations, and so they pull back on it. And in other cases, some of these retailers have learned, and I'm sure everyone on the call can attest to this, some of these retailers have learned that they're operating better now than they were pre-COVID in some cases, right? Not in all cases. And so I think those are the ones where when you sit down to have a renewal discussion, it becomes a conversation about a change in the definition of what the premises is and a definition of what they're paying rent on. So that's one element of it. The other element of it is we're taking a hard look at this in the context of our redevelopment program. So as we're sitting here thinking about reconfiguring and repositioning and recasting the nature of the physical space that we have, what can we be doing to make a certain section of the shopping center more inviting to a type of retailer who can use both indoor and outdoor space? And then, of course, we're going to get paid for that, right? We're not going to do it for nothing. So, that's, I think, how we're thinking about it.
Jason, how much more rent are you going to be willing to pay for pod space, parking lots, sidewalks? I'm just curious. Give me a price per square foot, how many hundreds per month? I'm just curious.
We're working through that right now. I think short term, like I said earlier, most of the landlords were cooperative, but as the renewals are coming up, which we have a number coming up over the next 6 months to a year, we are working with the landlords and including that in the documents going forward, how many spaces, an agreeable fee that works kind of for both sides. And it's, it's cancelable by both sides as well, but we are working with them. And we realize that in today's environment, being agile seems to me very important. So we're not doing anything too long term, because the trends could change. But overall, long term, we think that the BOPIS and the BOPAC are here to stay. So we are willing to make a small contribution to the landlords when necessary.
Seth, now that you're not a retailer, I got to ask you, where do you fall on this? Where do you fall on this position of should a retailer pay something for either short-term or what becomes longer-term outdoor space that isn't within a four-wall physical space?
I think it's all formulaic, and listen, without a profitable retailer, the landlord has nothing. So the idea is to do what's right for the business and figure out the best way to make it work. I know one of the questions was, how do you account for BOPIS stores if you were paying percentage rent? And that's a huge issue. It's one that I've been pushing with ICSC to come up with to address. And unfortunately, the lender community seems to be the one that's making it the most difficult to come up with something alternative than just sales per square foot. But I believe that there's got to be methodology out there, and this is just another piece of that, is what you're getting from your outside sales. The presence of that store accounts for X to a company. And, a lot of people on this call have heard me say this before, but store managers are bonused often on overall performance of the market or something like that. And I really firmly believe that should be something at this point in the lease process as part of the conversation to figure out something along those lines.
So let's wrap things up with an emerging trend, whether or not it stays and in what form or shape, and it's been alluded to. But let's talk about the utilization of traditional retail shopping center space as fulfillment, micro fulfillment, whatever you want to call it, but non-traditional use of space for retail, but servicing consumers that are doing retail. Jason, let's start with you.
Sure.
Your perspective from Party City as it relates to from a fulfillment and/or your perspective as a co-tenant in a shopping center where another retailer is converting some, part, or all, or vacant spaces are being used for micro fulfillment. What about it from those two perspectives?
Right. From our perspective, we are looking at a number of dark locations right now throughout the country where we have high volume markets, and looking at using them as like balloon fulfillment centers, delivery and things like that. So we are looking at that. Of course, talking from both sides of my mouth, that, when there's another retailer in the center that does something like this, I'm up in arms. So, I think we're feeling it out. We're all in this together, and, nobody knows. And the deals and extensions and new stores have to work for both landlords and tenants. So we're really open to kind of, let's see where this takes us at this point. But we are using and talking about using some of the dark stores, some of the lower volume stores as fulfillment centers as well right now.
Joe, what are you guys seeing as it relates to this trend, either with existing retailers and/or new retailers, ghost kitchens, or retailers that are looking for this type of space?
It's interesting. Back when the pandemic first started, and New York City required all stores to be closed, a lot of tenants still operated as fulfillment centers. So they did close their doors to customers, but they were still supplying to the local communities. So I think that's interesting. I think we need to be flexible, right? I think there's a trend that is yet to be, we don't know exactly what the path is going to be, but there's going to have to be some flexibility on both sides, and everybody just work together for the better good of commercial real estate and retail.
Eric, from a retailer's perspective, in terms of space for fulfillment, how do you decide, what parts of an existing infrastructure, an actual store that you convert, and then if you're going into space that's inside of a traditional shopping center, but you're using it for fulfillment, do we know what those economics look like relative to market rents and what the landlord should be thinking about?
I would say no. I'm not sure. I'm not sure we do. It's the one word answer to your question, but I think to the extent that the retail space is being used exclusively for fulfillment and not for curbside pickup, where the customer is responsible for that final mile delivery, it's a huge challenge. Where it's a hybrid model and you're still generating traffic to the center and to the retailer that may still have a physical store experience, I think the economics are much more favorable. Because we certainly have proven, the various business units of Bed Bath & Beyond that customer that's coming for curbside potentially is also walking in the store. If they're coming for BOPIS pickup in the store, they're adding to the transaction fairly significantly and probably shopping in the center and cross-shopping the stores in the center. So I would look at it more that way. In terms of choices in the network for where to do fulfillment, we're looking at stores that are oversized, and so many retailers are grappling with the same challenge where they have lower productivity in stores, primarily due to the channel shift to e-com, in general, whether it's their own digital business or, Amazon or some other big killer in DTC. We
got 58 minutes through this without mentioning Amazon. It was very impressive.
Right at the 11th hour. Point being that these unproductive stores, we need to convert them into fulfillment hubs or potentially close them and consolidate in order to make them productive and profitable.
We're going to jump, guys. So panel, thank you very much. We're going to jump to see if we can get to a few questions. We have a couple extra minutes, so I'm going to try to get these in. When you get the question, let's see if we can be right to the point. Hi, are you guys experiencing or making any changes regarding co-tenancy and exclusives in relationship to dark stores and potentially conversion to fulfillment?
So as relates to dark stores, obviously we're going to be as aggressive as we can in negotiating co-tenancy clauses with the open. Obviously, that's something we would do no matter what. If those dark stores become fulfillment centers, exclusively fulfillment centers, we're going to obviously hope that we're able to get that counted as a co-tenant, but I think it remains to be seen where those negotiations go. We're still really at the very beginning of this.
Jason, retailer's perspective? Yeah,
I agree. We're still working through it. We're definitely it's much more of a focus now than I think it had been for the last couple of years. Co-tenancy, it was always there and we're always dealing with it. But right now it is definitely a big question from the C level down.
Got it. And real quick, we'll go around the horn real quick.
Hey, Daniel, who would have thought that urgent care would be the busiest active tenant in a shopping center and want them to be there?
Right.
As we all know, retail is a cyclical and a business that is evolutionary. So we're just evolving to where the customer, what they want, when they want, where they want it. Do we anticipate, Joe, do you anticipate that there's going to be a need for any type of verification that a store or a shopping center is clean and safe, meets CDC or current guidance and standards?
Each jurisdiction is going to be different, but I don't think there's going to be a demand for certification or anything of that sort. I don't foresee that ever coming, because particularly with strip centers, we control very little of the tenant space. In the enclosed shopping center business, we have a handful of malls, a different animal, and it's something where we may hit some restrictions with occupancy load. Other than that, I don't foresee it.
I disagree.
Jason, on renewals, are you looking to do more leases with percentage rent provisions?
We do. We have a bunch with percentage rent, and we are looking to do some, blending and extending out here on our better stores to, we're working with landlords throughout the whole country to really, get our retail nodes, make sure those stores are locked in for the future.
Got it. Well, look, we've exhausted our time. We only said Amazon once to Seth's point at the 58-minute mark, so I appreciate it. Thank you very much to everybody on the panel, to everyone at ICSC, and for everybody who logged on to listen to us.